is when we decided to move to Asheville. And I had an incredible garden, and I didn't want to give it up. So I figured out there must be a way that I can take the best of that garden and move it with us down to Asheville. And the day, because you had to work ahead with this, the day that the truck was coming, we had 2 trucks, one for household, one for plants. Imagine the one for plants would be a smaller truck. And the day before that truck arrived, I went out into the garden and I dug up things to break. Now I have to read you the weather for November 15th and 16th of 1989 because none of you will remember. And the only reason I do is because we lived through it. Now you'll also hear about the horrors of the storms today. And then today, the storms, the last one in Tennessee 2 weeks ago, were worse than what happened in 1989. A destructive tornado outbreak struck a wide swath of the southern and eastern United States, as well as Canada, on November 15th and 16th, 1989. It produced at least 40 tornadoes, caused 30 deaths as a result of 2 deadly tornadoes. The most devastating event was the Huntsville, Alabama, F4 tornado, which killed 21 people on the afternoon of November 15th. 9 more fatalities occurred at a single elementary school by an F1 tornado on November 16th in Newburgh, New York, 36 miles to the east of where our house was. Although further survey reveals that this might have been a downburst instead. This outbreak also produced the most tornadoes in a single day in New Jersey. Several other insignificant tornadoes were reported across 15 states. Now you turn on the television, and in case you didn't know, if you turn on ABC Nightly News at 6:30, it runs 15 minutes before you get an ad. So that all of the really important stuff, including some incredibly frightening weather pictures, will be over when at 6:45 the commercials start. So between 6:45 and 7, you get one commercial for every story. So be aware of this because it's a wonderful way to watch the worst of the news, which is the best of the news, and then go and listen to dinner music from somewhere else. Now, I moved stuff in that garden on November the 15th when the tornado occurred in Newburgh. Now I want to add, we had just paid for a new gutter system on the house we were leaving. And one of the noises that joined me throughout the afternoon, in addition to rain and wind, was one of the gutters came loose in the front of the house, and almost like a rhythm for a South American orchestra, so bang, there'd be 3 minutes of silence, and then bang, 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 as the wind whipped the gutter back and forth. So, the most incredible thing about doing all of this was that I planned ahead by making little drawings of plants on a map of the backyard, because we were moving to Asheville to an acre of land on Kenilworth Lake. But the man who had built that house, his wife was a very close friend of Doan Ogden, of whom many of you have heard. And Doan was an incredible gardener. So that the place where we were moving was next door, was 6 acres of some of the most wonderful wildflowers ever seen in Asheville. And that was, you're nodding, Randy, that was Doan Ogden, who was a delightful and wonderful man. And he had come to Asheville during the Army. When it was over, he went back and got a degree in landscape architecture and proceeded to spend the rest of his life developing those 6 acres. Now, how many of you have ever walked those gardens?
Several.
Not many, have you?
You had a tour there several years ago.
But unfortunately, it's just that when you stop and think of the things that have been lost in the area in which we live, but you do not want me to catalog it for you, because I'm pretty sure you're aware. So anyway, my wife's uncle and aunt lived in Asheville. And my wife's aunt was the woman who worked for John Cram's store in Biltmore Village. And she always looked like a Spanish Contessa, although she was German. But she wore her hair beautifully fixed and always had a lot of silver jewelry. And of course, she taught John everything he knew about store decoration, window display, and how to run a business. So he got the best out of her, and of course she was helpful to me when we started to move down here. But how do you choose? I have to read in this. How do you choose? There were hundreds of plants in our old garden, many of them raised from seed, obtained from the various rock garden societies and the seed exchanges of the Hardy Plant Society and our own American Horticultural Society. The selection was Catholic, that's with a lowercase c, and included many ornamental grasses, yet at the big time back then. How do you single out the winners? Anything I could repropagate from seed had space efficiency in its favor. I had started to late summer to collect seeds, and by October's end had amassed over 150 paper packets, each carefully labeled, from plants that I couldn't take with me down here. Luckily, I had a greenhouse installed on the front of our house. And I want to stop for a minute and tell you about what I had to do to get that greenhouse approved. It turns out that in Asheville, I couldn't put a hobby greenhouse on the front of the house unless it was approved by the zoning commissioner. So, I had to go to everybody who lived within 3 houses of me and get a letter of approval from them that they didn't mind if I put a hobby greenhouse in the front of our house on Lakewood Drive. The standard answer that I got was, the way that house looks today, a greenhouse in front will make it look a hell of a lot better. So you got our approval. But I still had to hire a lawyer, go down to a hearing in City Hall, and the entire city council was there, plus the zoning commissioner. The interesting thing about the zoning commissioner, he was the only black person in the room. This is 1989. And he got up and he said, I'm here to talk to you, to the council, about Mr. Loewer wanting to put a greenhouse in. Well, I don't know what her name was, but some blonde babe said, we don't want anything commercial messing up our neighborhoods. I can remember this like it was yesterday. This is 30 years ago. So we've come a long way. Especially Kenilworth, because Kenilworth is important to the city of Asheville. Important? They would drive over it if they could, because the people who live there have raised arguments and complaints over the years about anything that the city has tried to do. But anyway, the zoning commissioner gets up when she's finished, and he said, may I have a moment? And they all sat there, and he said, Mr. Loewer wants to put a commercially designed greenhouse, bronze steel, tinted glass, in front of a stone house, and there will be no windows blocked because the area that he wants to put the greenhouse in, there were no windows in the original garden plan or house plan. And he looked at he said, when his house was built, the idea was to look to the back where Lake Kenilworth is, and you would have very little windows looking out on Lakewood Drive because that's a thoroughfare. And he kind of made it sound like you're idiots if you didn't know this, and you're idiots anyway. I'll never forget, this is wonderful. So he said, why don't you stop all of this phony stuff? And I had a lawyer here, and they had their lawyer up there. He said, you don't care what he does if it doesn't interfere with what you wish to do somewhere. So he said, let's get this over with. Let the man build his greenhouse. The neighborhood has approved of it, and you'll never hear again. And one guy up there said, well, it's within 15 feet of the street. And the black zoning commissioner says, this is the city. And being 15 feet from a street is a hell of a lot more space than I've seen around here. So somebody made a motion, they passed it, and I got to build my greenhouse. Now, I don't know how many of you have lived here, but 30 years in Asheville amounts to a lifetime, even if you're a king or queen in another country. It's a tough city to live in, and it is constantly under fire. It's under fire right now by a state that doesn't care. Imagine laws have been passed, and I don't know how many people here know it, that enable you to build a house, a new house, 8 foot from the house next door. It's happening right down the street from us. And the worst thing about what's happening down the street is they're short houses. They're one story. So if that one-story house A burns, I guarantee the house 8 feet from it on the left, one story, is going to burn too. And this is on a narrow street, which only 2 new, smaller cars can pass each other, going up Waverly or coming down Waverly. And they want to put in 5 more houses. And each house will have 2, 3, as many as 5 people. And if there's any kids, there's going to be 1 car for the older kid, 1 car jump for the younger kid, 1 car for mom who has to work part-time in order to support all this, and 1 car for dad. So you've got 4 cars with no place to park. I'll stop. The problem is, when you're surrounded with intelligence, it's very difficult not to go on a little bit about some of life's inequities. So anyway, in that storm, I would go in to the kitchen where my wife had a lot of paper towels and thermoses of coffee, and I would have a cup of hot coffee, dry off, and go out and dig again. Then I had the garage open so that I could move stuff into the garage and make sure that was dried off a little bit before the truck that late afternoon backed up to the garage and loaded over 50 plants in pots and bags into the back of that truck. I will never forget this. If it happened today, I'd go to the movies, except you can't go to the movies. But I would do something, and I wouldn't sit around and try to save any of them anymore, like I did then. But it was really, really important. But I want to tell you that when I talked to my uncle about moving from Upper New York State to North Carolina, where we lived, it was 125 miles from Manhattan, and it was 20 miles from Woodstock. Remember Woodstock?
Yes.
Woodstock was the biggest folk festival ever held in the eastern part of the United States, where over 1 million people came and blocked Route 17 and spent 3 days in a rainstorm, packed into Max Yasker's old farm. And actually, the food was provided by some ladies from Bethel, New York, called the Mothers of Bethel, or by short, the Moms. And they hired a hospital helicopter and dropped bagged lunches out on 1 million people in order to have some food, because there was no way to bring food in or bring food out. I want to tell you, that was the most exciting thing you've ever been involved in, was having that happen, and not one person was hurt. Think of it. Now, all these kids today, if they did it, you'd lose 300 of them before they even got it started. They kill each other by tripping over each other. But anyway, my uncle said, it gets cold in the Catskills, but it never gets cold in Asheville until January. And I said, you're kidding. And I said, how come they say it's Zone 7B? Well, he said, you overlooked that. He says, we have some bad storms in February, but he said, you never get any snow. How many of you remember 1993? How many were here in 1993? So you don't know about what happened. Randy, did we have snow in 1993? The city was locked down for 3 days. Some of the people who drove the plows that were in the city's hiring actually thought that you could drive up Mount Pisgah Road with a plow. That's the level of the highway department here in Asheville at that 1993. The Walmart, which is now another building entirely in the Tunnel Road complex just before you turn into the tunnel. That was the first Walmart in the area. So you know what people did on a sunny, snowy afternoon? They walked because there was no traffic at all. You couldn't drive in the streets. If somebody had to go to the hospital, you hoped for a snowmobile. It was that bad, the snow. But everybody got out and they walked over to see the new Walmart. I won't say a thing about that. But anyway, don't worry about the move, said the man who was driving the plant truck. Because he said, as long as you move before Thanksgiving, the weather here should be fine. And he gave a snappy salute to the sky, and he said, it never gets that cold in North Carolina before January. So anyway, the day of the move, the movers arrived for the packing of the truck on the morning, I thought it was the evening, it was the morning of November 16th. Everything that could be put in a box was put in a box. Our living room resembled the final warehouse scene through Raiders of the Lost Ark. Now, with most of November had been beautiful, with chilly nights and pleasant cool days, but that morning dawned with temperatures in the high 50s, high humidity, and a sky thick with slow motion clouds, providing a wind that began at 30 miles per hour and never slowed down. That's what we faced loading the trucks. Now, I have to find the sheet here. The morning of the 19th was clear with welcome warmth. We made the drive in 12 and a half hours, in time for a light supper before we bedded down on borrowed cots. Now, I want to point out that when we moved, we had a K-car, station wagon. I moved my computer. Yes, I had a computer. I had a computer at that time and a printer, and was very, very worried that anything would happen to them, so they moved. We had 2 cats. We had a German Shepherd dog. Then we had a lot more stuff in boxes that was important that couldn't be shipped. My wife worried about it going with anybody else. And so we drove here in 12 and a half hours. Now I want to point out that going up I-40 into Black Mountain was a little bit chancy, because that road never should have been built there to begin with, but apparently somebody made a lot of money by having it go on that particular route. But when we got up to the top, and we're on one of the roads from Black Mountain to Asheville, the cat began to wake up from the sleeping pill that had been given to it by our friend in the back. And my wife said she's getting ready to take a leak. I said, I'll stop the car. Now, I guarantee, unless you're in the arts or you're in Asheville, this kind of thing doesn't happen to you. But I drove over to the side of the road, opened the driver's car, grabbed the cat, ran around to the other side of the car so I'm off the road, and held the cat up like this, and the cat leaped into the gutter. When it was all finished, I folded the cat up, took the cat back inside. She immediately went to sleep, and we went on to our new home in Asheville. The more I think about this, the worse it gets. But I wanted to add here that I had to fight to get the greenhouse. And when the greenhouse came, I was confronted with 7 boxes of bulb and plastic plants. And everyone said, it's cold today. And not one of you will remember, because you don't make records on this sort of thing. But the temperature plunged. So I had tropical plants that were wrapped in plastic which is the worst thing that you can wrap a plant in if you're going to have a lot of chill. So I had all of that. And unseasonable cold, everybody said. Unreasonable cold, I grumbled as I set out to dig holes in the new garden where I could find to put the stuff in and get it settled before the winter got any worse. It literally took days to complete the job, and my hope was that by spring I would not have forgotten where everything had been tucked. Now, I couldn't bring it in today. It's 35 pounds, and I had the books to bring. But I have an Arctic willow that I planted in my garden up north in probably must have been about 1985. And it was a beautiful, beautiful plant, and I wanted to bring it with us. So I dug up that Arctic willow, and one of the first things that happened when I got to the new home, I went to the bottom garden, and I dug a hole, and I put in the Arctic willow, which sat there for 25 years, and did wonderfully at the beginning. But you know what's happening. It's getting warmer. And so the plant, instead of continuing to send out a lot of growth, is now sending out less growth. So I potted it in a beautiful pot, and most of the weight is the dirt. And I actually have it set up that if we really get cold, I can bring it outside. And it gets a vacation from the heat. So I did all kinds of stuff to get it finished. But in mid-February, I finished planting exactly 64 little pots of seeds. Tomorrow I will do more. I'm reading from a story that was in the American Horticulturalist. I will do the camellia is in bloom, and the winter honeysuckle, Loewer fragmentissima, wafts its perfume amid the glow of mountain rhododendrons down at the edge of Kenilworth Way. But be it government decree or eminent domain, I will never move again. They'll have to put me in a large pot, wrap it up in excelsior, and ship me out screaming. I'm not finished. The next thing that happened is it's getting warmer. And you don't know it unless, well, someone like Randy who keeps notes. And my friend Peter Bentling has got a notebook that goes back now 40 years. And he can show you, week by week, year by year, that it was much colder here 30 years ago than it is today. And the plants show it. The ones that want real cold are not doing that well. The wildflowers that are not that fussy, but just generally don't want to freeze, they're doing better, but you'll notice they're blooming earlier. And some things never, chickweed, while you don't want to have it in your garden as a beauty plant, is blooming most of the year. You can find chickweed somewhere because it is getting warmer. Now I do want to point out that there is a minor good side to the warmth. You can start to grow things that you never could here before. But be warned that even if you do, you've got to have enough of a setup that if we get one of these chills, which we're allowed to get, that palm that you put in at 6 years old will have to be protected because it just won't take bad weather. But I wish that I could have brought in, and I'm going to give this a pause and ask him to send it out with a newsletter. My printer won't do it. But my wife did this wonderful drawing of me, which I'll have everybody get one here. It shows me with a dog looking on, digging up plants with thunder and lightning. And the fact that you actually can do what I did and survive. Now, the book that I gave out today is full color. It's about ornamental grasses. And if you're not into ornamental grasses, you should be, because they're one of the things that really do beautifully here in Asheville, especially those that bloom in the fall. But somebody asked me what I've done for the last year and a half, because I can't teach anymore. Well, I am going to teach starting on Thursday. I've got a 2-hour class that's going to run for 5 weeks, but they've warned me. They're pretty sure it's probably not going to run through the entire 5 weeks because of the pandemic and the idiotic people who refuse. And I've told a couple of people here at lunch, back at the end of the 1700s, French farmers, which were never the brightest people on earth, French farmers, without complaint, took a vaccine for smallpox. And it was the first vaccine given out. And the reason why they did is because all of them had relatives that were scarred. The reason why paintings and portraits did so incredibly well in the latter part of the Middle Ages on into the 17th and 1800s was that most people, unless they were fortunate, had pockmarks on their faces from smallpox. It was a deadly disease. And one of the problems we have today is that most of these people who are denying getting a vaccination have never heard a child with whooping cough. They have never seen anybody in an iron lung recovering from polio. They have never seen anybody die of rheumatoid arthritis. All of these things are now cured, or basically you're taken care of. So we have this whole generation of and they're ignorant. In newspaper talk, they're ignorant, 90-point Bedomi bold, EGNORANT explanation point. They're ignorant of what disease is. And it's kind of sad. So what did I do? Well, I only have one copy of this, but you might enjoy it. It's a mystery called The Last of the Swindlers. And I wrote this over the last year and a half because I was getting nuts that I couldn't go anywhere or do anything. And I read it again just to check if I missed any mistakes. And even I like to read it again because I had forgotten a lot of the stuff that happened. But it's about a retired editor from New York who goes to a town called Fernglade in western North Carolina and runs into some really awful people. And the wonderful thing about life in North Carolina, if you think you got worse of the last of the really awful people, go to the store, look around, more of them are moving. Any questions from anyone? And I missed the pictures, being able to show you what a lot of these plants are and how wonderful it is to grow them. And if you have one of these, I hold this up. This is with the world's big new time sucker. This is if you've got a life and you get this, you have to fight this to get your life back. But I did want to point out to you that there's a couple of programs that you can get for this. You don't all have to deal with what most people deal with this, which is idiocy. But I'm pulling it up here. Apple is an incredible thing. If you look at this carefully, this is the first and last time you're going to see a beautifully constructed machine offered for the money that this one is offered. But I have on it PlantNet, PLANTNET. It is safe, it is free, and it has thousands of plant identifying photos. So if you find a plant and you've got this, you can take a picture and send it in and find out what it was. I also have on here the Merlin, MERLIN, Bird ID program from Cornell. That is free. And that is so good that if you're at breakfast and you hear a bird that you don't recognize what it was, if you know how to use this, you can record the sound of that bird, send it on to Cornell and Merlin Bird ID, and they will identify the bird by its call and answer you back with the genus species. I think that in itself, the PlantNet and Merlin Bird ID, plus anytime you're stuck with a long wait, a very difficult game of solitaire, is worth what all the other stuff that this thing is supposed to bring you, and does, but it's always late. Anyway, you're a great bunch. I want to tell you, it's a great organization. And you should hold it to your chest with an affection, because it has not changed its name to be the Person's Garden. It's the Men's Garden Club, and we have 25 women's clubs in this general area. There's one for men, and there's a couple of women who I will not name, want us to open up the membership to women. They've got 25 places to go, but they want to be in on this. So fight them from the mountains, from the valleys, from the seas. Fight them and stay the Men's Garden Club. Thank you.